It happened in Puddlestorm, a town you wouldn't know. It's been gone for 10 years. This isn't really a story about a respectable town becoming a ghost town. It's just that everyone left later, no surprise there. And the town, in the end, barely lasted 5 years. That's exactly what I'm getting at. It's going to be a terrifying and bizarre story. But believe me, it all happened exactly like that. I saw it all with my own eyes. Do you believe in our Lord? Don't rush to answer. Listen to everything I'm about to tell you. Hugh Cairnwall, that was a true atheist, believe me. He never set foot in church half a dozen times in his life, except for his own wedding and Easter, and then only in Puddlestorm, and only because Mrs. Cairnwall brought him. You'd have to look hard to find someone like Catherine Cairnwall in the sinful West. That's what I'll tell you. I don't know why she got together with Hugh, but someone like her could have led him by the hand, not just to church, but to heaven itself. What attracted Cairnwall to her is still a mystery to me. It wasn't his wealth. He hadn't saved much, barely enough for a ranch. No girl would have called him handsome, and as for his youth, that's a laughing matter. Perhaps his past glory. Hugh Cairnwall. You've never heard of Cairnwall, just think of it. There it is, glory, 20 years gone, and the day is over. Cairnwall was the best shot from here to the Devil's Mountains. I don't know who could have matched him. No, I don't. Everyone who saw him in action and could speak afterward unanimously declared no man could shoot like that. Hitting a tossed pin at 40 paces was as easy for him as picking up this glass now. And he had enough courage. No, not that stupidity they call courage these days, but sober calculation to fight one against a dozen and emerge unscathed, save for maybe getting his boots stained with someone else's blood. You've never even heard of him now, but 20 years ago, damn time wears a horse out. 20 years ago, gunfighter Hugh Cairnwall was a death sentence. He traveled a lot in the West, and if he'd even thought of marking his kills with sticks on a tree bark, the tree would have long since lost its bark. When he turned 50, Cairnwall, I don't know why, decided to retire from his trade and settle down. He bought a small ranch about 5 miles from Puddlestorm. Why here, of all places? The thing is, the sheriff of Puddlestorm, Dan Mitchell, could boast of an old friendship with the gunfighter Cairnwall, so Hugh moved to this ranch with Catherine. Catherine wasn't a girl then either. Maybe they'd known each other for a long time, I can't say. But what a beauty Catherine was at 27, and what a beauty she must have been at 17. A veritable angel. She'd still be an angel even if she had a hunchback and not a tooth, mark my words. I've never seen such a gentle woman. My Mel, God rest her soul, or should I turn to the devil, I'm not sure. My Mel, God rest her soul, was more like an angry mountain cat, I say, than anything else. See that scar, sir? That one? I swear by my good eye that vixen hit me with a board, snatched from the broken barn in the blink of an eye. I didn't even have time to look around, though I probably couldn't have had a clearer view at the time. I've gotten distracted again. What are you going to do? So, the Cairnwalls? Only someone like Catherine could live next to old Hugh. What can I say? When they arrived, Cairnwall took his revolvers to the sheriff. That was the agreement he and Catherine had made. From then on, he only took a shotgun, and then only in extreme cases like hunting or something. But you see, be that as it may, if a man has worked his whole life for Mr. Colt and Mr. Daniels, it's hard for him to live like the rest. The town idiot once threw a nut from behind him. You should have seen the pirouette Hugh did. The damn nut whizzed by an inch past his back as he turned. I saw it with my own eyes, 2 of them then, and Hugh had his eyes half closed, as if he cared more to listen than to see. And then, as he turned, letting the damn nut pass his left and right hands, damn it, went to his belt at the same time, so fast I'll bet a steam engine couldn't have outrun him. The whole damn street stood still like one man, and he had nothing on his belt. And then everyone stood still, even poor Jim, the fool, and Hugh just stood there with his eyes closed, touching his belt with his fingertips, and doing nothing else. Then Catherine just took his arm and said something soft and gentle, like a bird, and he just stood there, and everything went on as usual. That's the kind of woman this Catherine was. Just imagine what happened to Hugh when she gave up her soul to God. But I'm getting a bit hasty. Let me wet my throat a bit more. Hugh Cairnwall was an atheist, not, a swearer, or, God forbid, a church robber. He simply didn't believe in anything, silently and honestly, never forcing it on anyone. And before you curse him, live the way he lived. Then I'll see how you look. And Catherine, a pious but wise woman, never dragged him to church. He'd drive her into town and wait at the entrance or something. He rarely went inside, except to please her. Just before it all started, he started going inside more and more often. Maybe something would have happened, but it didn't. Our priest at the time, Reverend Dell, was a so-so man. Sometimes the latter is even a scoundrel. But still, God works in mysterious ways, so Father Dell, that lying drunkard, was needed for something. Cairnwall couldn't stand him, but it was he who instilled in everyone back then. If you don't sincerely believe, you won't be saved. Nothing will save you from him. Simply pointing a crucifix or laying crosses or saying a prayer is pointless. You have to believe in what you're doing. Honestly, that was the only truth I heard from him in the entire time I knew him. And it all started when news reached Puddlestorm that something was wrong at Johnson's ranch. Everyone knew Johnson. He was a good rancher, God rest them all, with a wife and 4 children. The eldest was 20. His father was his first assistant, and the youngest, a girl, was 4 years old. And besides, he had about 20 workers and quite a few head of cattle. And it was these very cowboys that Headless Tom Elliott, a fool of a fellow, stumbled upon. He was on his way to Johnson's ranch to hire himself out, and there they were, the whole damn herd he would have been guarding, every single one of them, lying in the middle of the prairie, dead as a slab of meat. A good bit of sun-baked meat, I tell you. So Headless Tom rode into town, whipping his horse around noon, with a wild look in his eyes and shaking hands. Maggie swore later that he reined in his horse in the square, as if he was hesitating between going to the sheriff's office or the church. But he went to the sheriff's anyway. 2 hours later, word spread that the Johnson ranch was dead. Ted Johnson himself was dead, his wife was dead, all the children were dead, even the 4-year-old. All the workers were dead. All the cattle were dead. The guard dog in the yard was dead. Headless Tom refused point blank, categorically, to go with the sheriff and his boys and the other townspeople they'd brought along. Frankly, they didn't believe him at first. Headless Tom was saying some very strange things. And besides, Johnson had been seen in town just the day before, safe and sound. Those who remained in town treated Tom to drinks at the bar, at the house's expense, of course, since the place was absolutely packed, and questioned him, and they all agreed on one thing. Tom might be headless, but he certainly couldn't have made this up. The boy kept repeating with blue lips, "Dead, dead," and couldn't hold his glass. Whiskey splashed onto his trembling fingers. When he'd recovered enough to talk normally, he told them first about the cows, that they were lying in rows, like at a slaughterhouse, and that he'd examined them for a moment, trying to figure out whether they'd been shot, slaughtered, or perhaps died of disease. But he couldn't really tell, he admitted. The cattle had been dead for at least 3 days, although, he added thoughtfully, the vultures didn't seem to have touched them. A little scared, he covered his face with a handkerchief. What if the cows had died of something contagious? And galloped off to Johnson's ranch. Even then, he said, he felt uneasy, as if he could feel it coming out. A terrible silence reigned near the house. Not a sound, not a breath of wind. Tom dismounted and hesitantly led his horse by the bridle. Tom's horse, unlike its owner, was a clever creature, and Tom himself knew this, and was perhaps even proud of it. Well, this very same speech dug her heels in and wouldn't let anyone get more than 10 steps from the house. "No matter what you do," Tom said. But she didn't neigh. Not a sound, just silence. And he himself, Tom admitted, spoke only in a whisper. "It's like that," he explained. "You wouldn't have done it any other way." Well, Headless Tom was seriously scared now, but still, wrapping a kerchief over his eyes, he stepped to the door and knocked. That's when he realized it was unlocked. He knocked again, for appearance's sake, and then entered. The rest is well known. Everyone in the house was dead. Death seemed to have taken them completely suddenly, like a heart attack, and that, too, 3 days ago, no less. The family was sitting at the table. I won't describe it to you in detail like Tom. It's too scary. And the workers were scattered about in the yard, also dead. But what struck him, Tom added, was that the food on the table was completely fresh. He admitted that he approached, frozen with terror, and quietly, still glancing sideways at the elder Johnson, touched the beef on his plate with his finger. It was still warm. Then there was a thud in the yard. "Like iron," said Tom, beginning to tremble again, and he was blown out of the house. Like a whirlwind, he flew onto his speech and raced into town, and the horse was thrilled to gallop faster than the wind. But everyone already knew something was fishy. An uproar arose. They pushed Reverend Dell forward. He had been in the bar that morning and began asking why he hadn't gone with the sheriff. The Reverend, completely out of his element, was shaking in his knees by the time he finished his story. But to his credit, he tried to calm the townspeople and, as a last resort, hesitantly suggested they take refuge in the church till the sheriff and the boys returned. The proposal was enthusiastically approved by everyone, especially Tom. Having gathered our weapons, the whole town holed up in the church, and the Reverend bolted the door, busily dragging holy water and a crucifix out into the center. I don't know if the prayers helped me come to my senses. I didn't think so much, but they didn't help matters one bit. Of the men who had left with the sheriff, 5 returned, including Mitchell himself. As they themselves admitted, the empty town scared the crap out of them. You can imagine what they were afraid to find in the houses, but they quickly figured it out and raced to the church. 3 of the 5 horses died right there in the square. That's how fast they raced. When the sheriff himself put the bolt on the other side of the door and took a drag on his cigarette, and not a single woman said a word. He only asked if the others had returned, the 10 people who had left with them, and then a quiet groan swept through the church, the groan of those people, wives and sisters and others, who suddenly realized that their loved ones would not return. And, no one said anything to the sheriff again, not a word of reproach. They simply fell silent and began to listen, holding back tears. The people who had returned with Mitchell hurried to find their own in the crowd and stood beside them. The sheriff remained standing alone, his back to the door, and he, too, spoke alone, trying to speak very quickly. Something had changed on the prairie. They realized it as soon as they rode east from the city. The air had become, the sheriff paused, trying to find the right words, thicker or something. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. The sun was shining as brightly as it had that morning, but his men kept looking up to make sure the light was still there and that they were only imagining the colors darkening. When Johnson's house was clearly visible, Tommy Bryn suddenly raised his hand, pointing to the east. Dust billowed there as if from horsemen galloping away from the house. Looking closer, Mitchell even made out what looked like horses' rumps and the backs of those sitting on them, at least 5 men. Figuring that these men might be guilty of what had happened, they didn't yet know what exactly, and they still weren't entirely sure about Headless Tom. Bryn asked for men to accompany him in pursuit. The sheriff and his 5 men, he said, would catch up with them after they stopped at the house. They should detain these men first, he said, and then the sheriff would ride up to them still warm and lay all the charges. Mitchell wasn't worried about him. Bryn and the others he'd brought with him were excellent marksmen and smart guys, and besides, there were twice their number. Well, until he entered Johnson's house. A terrible stench immediately assaulted their nostrils, so foul it brought tears to their eyes. The remains of bodies were indeed near the table, but they could hardly be called bodies any more. And this wasn't just rot. It was something worse. The sheriff paused and lit a second cigarette, not the first time, and they were only able to inspect the table, but didn't have time to look into the yard. A gust of wind brushed Mitchell's right elbow, covered by his coat sleeve, and Bill Glenworth, who had been standing to the right of the sheriff the whole time, a step away, suddenly staggered and fell face down. Mitchell immediately jumped to his side, grabbing him by the shoulder and shaking him. but he only gurgled, and the floorboards were soaked with some black, sticky stuff flowing from his mouth. Mitchell and the others were seriously frightened, but the sheriff, a tough old man who never abandoned his own in trouble, didn't jump back and cross himself. Instead, he flipped Bill over onto his back, snatching the revolver with his other hand and still calling the boy's name. "You should have seen what happened to Bill's face," the sheriff added quietly, and fell silent. Having regained his composure, he didn't say what exactly. Widow Glenworth was standing closest to him now, but simply added that he hadn't spared the bullet. The shot resounded throughout the countryside, and it was as if something had torn from the air. A squall slammed into the house, a gale, and everyone rushed back to the horses. Mitchell glanced back only once from the hill and saw the dust they had mistaken for the hooves of the fleeing outlaws, and now he realized that the dust wasn't receding but approaching, and there was no one in it. "Let's go," Mitchell concluded his story. "We'll take the horses we have, the light wagons, the guns, and head west, away from danger. No belongings." His idea seemed no less sound than the one before. The idea of taking refuge in the church. No one wanted to abandon everything, but what awaited them was even more terrible, and the people poured out, hastily preparing their horses and trying not to lose their children in the confusion. The town was plunged into pure panic, and no matter how much Mitchell screamed, trying to bring order to it all, no matter how much he ran here and there, he could do nothing, especially alone. All his men were busy gathering their own families. Mitchell had no one to gather. In all the world, he had no one but his badge and his Colt pistols. And that was probably why he was the one who noticed the wagon rushing from the west. It burst into town at full speed, loaded with something like a sack or a bundle lying on the seat. The one whipping the horses was none other than Hugh Cairnwall, standing on the box and shouting something. Mitchell rushed toward him, waving his hat. Hugh skidded to a stop, jumped off almost while still moving, and grabbed the sheriff by the shoulders, shouting something about a doctor. Mitchell, in turn, tried to tell him what had happened, but Cairnwall looked completely mad. "A doctor! A doctor!" he shouted, dragging Mitchell toward his wagon. Then Mitchell saw what was lying on the seat. He glanced around instantly. No one had yet noticed Hugh had arrived in town. No one had noticed his wagon, and, grabbing the terrified, sweating horses by the bridles, he dragged them into a nearby dead-end street. Cairnwall, apparently convinced they were finally taking him to a doctor, walked quickly alongside him, urging both the horses and his friend on. In the alley, Mitchell shook Hugh soundly by the shoulders, slapped him, and holding his arms tightly to his body to keep him from doing anything stupid, quickly and clearly explained what was going on here, and, more importantly, what was going on at Johnson's ranch, and that they needed to leave quickly as possible. Cairnwall stopped struggling. He stared blankly over his friend's shoulder at the wagon and its cargo. Then he quietly and monosyllabically answered Mitchell's questions. Was there any wind before Catherine fell? Had he seen dust? How quickly had he reached town? And Mitchell began to explain to him that they couldn't go west now, only north or south. 2 of the 4 routes were now blocked, and the people needed to be told as soon as possible. But they were to keep quiet about the wagon and its cargo, lest such a panic arise that it would be impossible to calm, and that would be fatal for everyone. Mitchell himself, in truth, already understood, looking at Cairnwall's pale face, that he didn't care about a single person in town except the one in the wagon, and he understood perfectly well that he couldn't let Cornwall touch the body in the wagon or even pull back the blanket that covered his beloved wife. Well, what was left of her? And then, you see, Crazy Jim, who had climbed onto the roof of the barber shop in the confusion, screamed at the top of his lungs, "Dust! Dust from all sides! Coming to town!" You've probably never been to Babylon, the ancient one, I mean. Well, I bet I've been in a similar place, because what happened in the town a second after his scream couldn't be described any other way. Mitchell flew onto the roof of the barber shop, nearly knocking over the ladder, and saw that Jim hadn't lied. The damned dust had encircled the town in a ring barely a couple of miles across. 20 minutes later, the town was quiet. Not a single person on the streets, not a single sound. Everyone was back inside the church, everyone, without exception, praying. Reverend Dell, I guarantee you, had never been so in the spotlight and never felt so burdened by his role. He could have used a confessor himself. But then he said that line I mentioned earlier about having sincere faith, and Sheriff Mitchell bit his lip until blood came. He wasn't wearing a coat, by the way. He said he'd taken it off on the way to town, careful not to touch his right sleeve. Mitchell was tormented by something other than the general fear. And not just that. The town, every single one of its inhabitants, from the hotel owner to the floor polisher, from the biggest prude to the last whore, except perhaps the children and that fool Jim, was simply weighing its faith for the first time. And everyone realized the outcome was not in their favor. The townspeople confessed to each other all their sins, great and small, all their offenses, every glance, asking forgiveness from each other and from God. But they themselves understood in those seconds that nothing but fear motivated them, and this thought gnawed and gnawed at them, a hopeless thought. Cornwell hung around the door, the only one. The others, having pushed the benches apart, abandoned their useless weapons and sat in a circle in the center. Cornwell, however, glared at the door like a hungry coyote, pacing back and forth, and Mitchell, watching him, realized what he was looking at through the blind door, his wagon in the alley. And you know what? Cairnwall didn't pray. He didn't say a word. The sheriff stood up and walked over to him, placing his hand on his shoulder. Behind the door, all was quiet. Not a sound, not a movement. "I want to go outside," Cairnwall said quietly. "Don't be stupid," Mitchell replied. "It'll come here." They were silent for a moment. Hugh seemed to be gathering his strength for something. "Give me my pistols, Dan." Cairnwall's revolvers were lying in a dusty locker at the sheriff's station about 100 yards from the church. Of course, Mitchell had forgotten about them. "They're at the station." "Then let me have them." "Don't be stupid," the sheriff repeated. Cairnwall turned to him and said something so quietly that I didn't hear it, and none of us did either. And then they stood there, staring at each other for what seemed like an eternity, as if they were exchanging glances, and Mitchell slowly moved the nearest bench from the barricade near the door. When the door finally opened, all anyone could see was that it was very unnaturally sunny outside and dark. I swear by my other eye, dark and thick, like yellow ink. If you'd seen Cairnwall walk out the door, seen his footsteps, each one weighing a stone, you'd have dreamed about it for a long time, just like we all did later. He walked out into the street, and the sheriff didn't close the door, and no one said anything to him, watching with him as old Hugh Cairnwall limped across the square to the station, his long shadow reluctantly trailing behind him. How he emerged a short time later, his antique holster taut with his 2 revolvers. That's when everyone saw it far away on the street before the square. But who saw what? We never quite agreed. Maggie from the saloon swore it was a steam locomotive, only narrow and low, but long enough to reach from here to Orleans, and all by itself, no cars. My Mel swore there was nothing there but an old log, so twisted it was terrifying, and little Billy Thompson spotted an eyeless deer. As for me, sir, I saw a huge dog, probably as tall as a horse, a stinking 3-legged dog with a stub of a tail and a monstrous mouth. Not just across the muzzle like other dogs, but from one shoulder to the other, cutting across its entire body with 200 teeth. Smile all you want, we were in no mood for laughter then. Even the dumbest fool, no matter how much he saw, realized what it was. But no one closed the door. It's not that we weren't scared. I've never been scared of anything in my life. But we just realized, like before, that it was useless. The Reverend even lowered the crucifix he'd almost grabbed. Well, nothing would have saved us then. He was right. I wish I'd stayed in the bar all Sunday, I thought then, as I remember now. Maybe I'd have believed in whiskey. And I simply took my Mel by the hand. And the dog was staring at the door, staring at us, even though it was standing far away by the watering hole. And suddenly, it turned its creepy head, or whatever it had, at Hugh Cairnwall, who had limped closer, stood, about 40 paces away, with his legs spread, and I swear was measuring the dog, well, what he saw, with an appraising glance. And then the dog bared its teeth, but before it could growl, Cairnwall pulled out his revolvers, drew them lightning fast, as if he'd never taken them off his belt. We just gasped, and emptied both clips into the beast's mouth. And, of course, he never missed. Young Dick had sharper eyesight than I did, so he later told me he saw Cairnwall's eyes gleam when he started shooting, and how they glittered afterward, when the dust had cleared, bright as new bullets, and no less evil. There was something about them, Dick added, something heavy, like his steps. Afterwards, everyone went their separate ways, of course. I already told you about that, so I moved to the ringing mine, and I don't know where Cairnwall and Mitchell and the others went. All I know is I've just told you a strange story, the absolute truth, sir. And I tell you, faith is such a thing. Cairnwall was a true atheist. That's all there is to it. And he only went to church half a dozen times in his life, and only for his Catherine, unlike the rest of us who sat there every Sunday. Even now I feel uneasy when I think about it all. I'm still the same as I was then, in church. I don't know about the others. God help them. And gunfighter Hugh Cairnwall shot something I'd better not name, not pretending he had a right to believe. If he believed in anything, it was his wife, an earthly angel, and his revolvers. But he only truly believed, and I guess that was enough for God.